Howdy everyone, it's me, Manic coming to you from Thanksgiving Day here in the bunker system. In today's video, oh man, this is still working. The mark of the beast is still working. I just got to hold that up. And because it's Thanksgiving Day, I wanted to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. I hope you're enjoying your friends and your family. Because it's a special day, I wanted to talk about Nazis. Not necessarily Nazis. It just happened to the topic just fell on today. I'm not doing this to be contrary. Yes, you are, Manic Mark. I know, I'm just contrary. But it actually was the thing that was the... Anyway, I mentioned... No, I didn't. I cut that out. I've read a huge pile of books on World War II. I started when I was 14, trying to understand the conflict. And stop doing that. It's actually helping. I'm actually realizing now when I got to get that split second before I actually utter, the dreaded thing, and I'm getting there. Understanding World War II. I think nobody wants to spend their whole life. I did. It's okay. But very few people, I realize, spend any time reading history. And I've always said, if you pick something that interests you in history and read a bunch of books about that one particular period in history, like a conflict or a war, you'll get to understand how things happen, how human beings do things, and why we get in trouble and why we have wars. And World War II is a rather massive period of time to try to consume and understand, because much of what is written from the perspective of the author, and authors collect other people's perspectives of themselves, which of course always is jaded. So you don't know how much of what you're getting is real. But if you read enough of it, you get a general idea of what's going on. So with that background set, I would never talk about a book like this, and I've never done it. This is the first time, but this is the first book I've read out of the hundreds and hundreds of books I've read on World War II that was more than just like, how do these people get through this horrible thing and live to tell the story, which that's basically what most books are about. This book dispels the myth that we all have about the Blitzkrieg, the lightning strike. And I'm not going to be able, I'm only halfway through, and I'm not going to be able to do the author justice. It's very difficult for me to explain the whole thing, but excuse me, I cut that part out. Just was clearing my throat. You don't need to hear that. But I'll just raise some high points of the book. One, most people think that the Germans had technological marvels, especially at the beginning of the World War, that their armor and their planes and their tanks were superior to the Allies' armors, planes, tanks. No, it's not right. It's not correct. The German tanks weren't. They were, in fact, inferior, even to the French tanks. Okay, that's the other thing. The French, all their tanks they just didn't drive in reverse. I mean, we always make fun of the French, but it's not because of what you think. It wasn't because of the soldiers on the ground, and I'll get to that. So the French had a heavier tank, a B-1, I think it was the B-I-S. And forgive me, my brain has trouble retaining anything, so it's not going to be like you're listening to a history professor go over this. If anything sparks your interest, get the book. Which could take anything the German tanks had to offer and punch right through the German tanks. And there's these other smaller countries like Belgium, the Netherlands, which the Germans had to, hopefully I'm getting this right, had to go through and around, and the idea that couldn't hold up to the Germans, and he uses the Russian-Finnish War, the Finland War. I almost hate talking about this because I'm going to screw it up. As a way to show that even the Russians had superiority in men and armor, that the Finns held their own for many months. He uses that as an example. And okay, so let's see, where do we go from here? So the French, and they had modern planes, they had modern fighters. Now what? And also, curiously enough, the Allies and the French and the Germans were on the same page when it came to how they structured their military as far as armor formations. They had the same basic concepts of how to use them going into it. So, and he talks about fortifications, how they weren't necessarily outmoded. Fortifications weren't. The Blitzkrieg did not do away with the need for fortifications, and fortifications weren't outmoded. And he uses his, fact to dispose that myth. So I'm just to the point now where the Germans have gone in and overrun France. And how did that happen? Because if it's not the Blitzkrieg, how did it happen? Well, and this is the most interesting point of the whole book for me, is that they did make the breakthrough, because the one thing they did use well, which they had, because of the Spanish-American War, they had some training, was they were able to use their Air Force and ground in concert with their ground forces. They had better, okay, and they threw everything they had in at one time. They didn't piecemeal things, and that was one of the, and even the Poles. He uses the Poles as an example of creating that myth. I got to go back up and talk about when the Germans went into Poland. That you think Poland was overrun in a week. Well, the Germans wanted the Allies to think that, so they created a myth that Poland had been defeated, when actually the Polish army held out for a long time. And the Poles had good equipment too. And they held out for much longer than anyone gave them credit for. And the only reason they collapsed is because the Allies chickened out and didn't help them like they said they would. Okay? And the Russians, of course, helped Hitler and moved in, and it made matters worse for the Poles. And Poles were landlocked between these two massive powers. Anyway, so going into France, what happened? Well, they did make the initial breakthrough, okay, but that wasn't the end of it. The French army wasn't defeated. The British expeditionary they used their planes in piecemeal fashion against the Nazis, which didn't help them any. Okay, the Germans threw everything they had, and they didn't have as much as they had before they went into Poland, because the Poles took care of much of it. So they were actually in a weakened state, but they knew not to stop, and they threw everything in. But that wasn't the end of it. When they broke through, the French army wasn't in any sense of the word defeated. The soldiers were fighting back fiercely. The British Expeditionary Force, other than the Air Force, wasn't involved yet. But what happened was, the people at the top, the very top French people, thought they just lost their minds. They thought that was the end, because the Germans had been able to make this initial breakthrough, and they basically declared that they were defeated. Okay, so all the guys on the ground and were left hanging in the wind. The British said, well, if you're defeated, we're going to go away, and they just decided to run away, because the French leaders said, we're done. So they ran away. They didn't even that's where I am right now, basically. So, but what I find interesting about all that, and I'm taking up too much time, is that the person at the top, if you can influence the person at the top somehow to form an opinion in their head, then it can change the whole course of history. So basically what he's saying is, if the French and the British had hung in there, they could have avoided the vast horribleness, the more vast, it was already horrible, but the whole giant horribleness of World War II may have been averted. Anyway, that's it. I don't know. Just take what I said for what it's worth, and if you find any of it interesting, and even if you disagree with me, then you want to probably get the book. Because, like I said, out of all the World War II books I've read, this has been highly interesting. It starts out, it's a little bit technical for me, but you soon get in it past that and get into what the guy is talking about. Anyway, hope everybody having a nice Thanksgiving. You're not thinking about Nazis like I am today.